Sorry, I'm not fluent in Russian, so I'm going to do the presentation in English. Thanks for the invitation. And today we are, together with my colleague Lina, we are going to drive you throughout our experience on how to use data on transforming businesses and bringing activation assets towards the problem of how to understand consumers and how to anticipate trends on consumers. We're going to go on two pieces of the presentation. So I will go through a Spanish use case that we run together with Heineken, and then Lina will jump into a Russian specific case that we also perform here. We're going to talk on the Spanish case about the sub. I'm not sure you're familiar with this product from Heineken, which is something we will explain, but basically it's the ability to have a machine at home that serves your draft beer, okay? So our experience with Heineken comes from long ago, as far as December 2015, where together with their media agency by that time, we were working on a data strategy by using our DMP facilities. They were first movers inside the group around data. And as a result, in January 2017, Heineken as a group decided to ink a major contract with the DMP provider, whose name is Crux, now belongs to Salesforce. But still, in Spain, we managed to continue working because of this legacy and because of the good expertise and services that we were delivering together. And we ended up building this use case, which I'm going to tell you. At the beginning, before the project, we were working on a traditional DMP implementation. So basically, we were collecting data from the different touchpoints Heineken was seeing clients coming from, websites, media, et cetera, and we were challenged to say, okay, we are going to launch a new product, which is the product you have behind me, the Zub, and we want to be more relevant in our communication, and we want to understand what the consumers are needing before we push forward this product. We need to understand, are we covering a need that the market is showing? How are we going to understand the consumer journey? How are they relating to beers? So, and I have to thank Heineken because of their open mindset. The first thing they did is to put partners to work together. Instead of having a mindset which is siloed on a partner by partner, provider by provider, what they did is to create a task force, to create a team out of different companies that was working by sharing and accepting the challenge all together. So we had different kickoff meetings on which Heineken asked the client, but also the providers, we were all involved. And it was the first time this approach was being pushed forward. And we ended up building the project with clearly objectives that are identify consumer habits. What are users willing to have? How are we going to create these 3-4 personas that are defining the profiles, the interests, the targets that we have to push for? So as I was telling you, it was a combination of 4 companies. On the left, of course, the brand Heineken. We had Webrama as a database and data modeling and data science company. We have Axi, who's a CRM company, so they're mostly working on extracting value out of CRM. And the Royap agency, who was the partner that the Heineken was using in Spain for performance marketing, okay? So out of that, we had multiple sessions. We drafted different needs, different alignments between the different data pools, and we ended up understanding what was the core asset each of these companies was providing to Heineken. So of course, Royap Media, they had a lot of information. They had a lot of data coming from their media campaigns. Who is clicking, who is converting, who's not clicking, all that media information that is traditionally out there sometimes is lost. We just use it to optimize funnels, but we never enter into saying, hey, let's find what's behind a click. Why is this user clicking, okay? The second one, Axi, interesting company, focused on CRM. They track Heineken clients throughout all loyalty programs. They're extracting as much data as they can, and they're coming with very solid data, but only about clients of Heineken. So what are those users, clients, consuming when they're not talking to Heineken? Big question mark, okay? And that's what we were trying to figure out. And of course, ourselves, modeling, using our assets or semantic approach to score users and to link all the data sets. So we ended up building 4 personas. I'm going to spend a little time explaining each of them, but basically we have people who's leisure lovers, beer lovers, geeks, and home. If we enter into the explanation, leisure lovers is people who enjoy their free time. And they have 2 Bs, 2 consumption times. When they're at home, what do they like doing? And when they're out of home. And we ended up building and understanding what are the centers of interest, of correlated interest that each of these users that are being scored as leisure lovers are having. Okay, you can see gambling, you can see theater, museum, etc., etc. Beer lovers, of course. Just think we are about to push a product which is enabling you the ability to have fresh drop beer at home. So of course, beer lovers is target number 1. But what is a beer lover? How can we describe what a beer lover is? So we, of course, used customer data of people who's already buying Heineken products, and we also try to correlate with intent data to see what correlated interests they had. So we can see the different media procedures, people who's interested in spirituous wines and all this kind of stuff. And of course, geeks. Don't forget, Heineken is pushing a device. It's a machine that serves beer, drop beer at home. So it's a machine. So let's look for people who's, first of all, a fan of machines, of geeks, of assets. Second, let's try to identify those users who are luxury, because it's not a cheap machine, and it has some angle of joy on this early adoption content. And of course, people who loves spending time at home. People who's really gourmet driven, who's really healthy, who's practicing very quite high level sports like horse riding or nautics or golf, and people who's doing the shopping even online or offline, but buying gourmet stuff. So once we described the personas, and thanks to our capability to model and to use data science and artificial intelligence to push and to create data for the client, for Heineken, we ended up scoring consumers in Spain on each of these buckets. So we create each of these segments, and traditionally everybody says, yes, now I have a target for a media campaign. So wait. Heineken was very smart and said, I'm not going to address each persona the same way. Why don't we involve our content providers to create specific content assets for each of these personas, because we know a lot of them. We know what they're looking for. We know what are the correlated interests. So let's build a story for each of them. So this is the way we've been working on the sub. But once we were finalizing the deployment of the project, we said, we can do better. We can do more. There is a product that Heineken was launching in Spain, which is a beer marketplace. I don't know if you're familiar with the beer industry, but in Southern Europe, there is a big mood about artisanal beers, draft beer, that it's done by very local companies. They're very small. They don't belong to the big groups. And this guy said, why am I going to miss the opportunity to lead the relationship with consumers who are consuming my product, even if it's not done by me? So they launched this marketplace in order to become the connector between users, consumers who consume beer, and the different brands and models. So this is the beer marketplace that we created together. And something that was also very, very interesting is the ability that Heineken has as a client to understand that consumers do not belong to brands. That the same consumer who's drinking beer is eating pizza. So very smartly, we connected the 2 brands. We said, hey guys, we're working with you, Domino's Pizza in Spain. We're working with you, Heineken in Spain. There are thousands of things you can do together the minute you start sharing your data. So if you're pushing forward football Champions League night, like yesterday or tonight, and you're spending millions on promoting Heineken as a main sponsor, and Domino's Pizza is pushing media like crazy because it's golden time to sell pizza, why don't you start sharing your data and create common actions? And this is exactly what we did in Spain together with these two brands. And now I'm going to pass it to Lina, who's going to talk to you more into Russian-specific market.
Thank you.
Поприветствуем Лину. In English.
In English as well. I apologize. Also, my Russian is just not there yet. Yeah, this is a very great case from Spain, where, to be honest, we're a few steps ahead compared to Russia. But we are also on this digital transformation journey here, and we're starting to work more and more with data, and we have very ambitious plans to understand our consumers here locally, apply all of these data-driven and digital techniques also here. And that's why we launched now a case together with Weborama and with our media agency, Publicis Media, into trying to understand, okay, what is exactly the value added that we can create from using big data analytics and analytics for with all of the new technologies and all the new data sources that we're seeing here. So unfortunately, we don't have the sub appliance here yet, which would be absolutely great.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate.
Yes, it's very unfortunate
that we don't have it here
yet
in the hall.
Yes, well, we are working on that. So the plan is to launch also the sub here in Russia eventually. But at the moment, of course, here, as you probably all know, there are certain restrictions for beer brands still being in Russia and all. But as soon as we get over those, I'm sure we will also be able to offer these cool home draft appliances here. But in any case, so despite all the restrictions and challenges that we face here in the local market, we are taking steps towards this direction of being more advanced in digital and in data. And the case that I want to show today is one to take these first baby steps towards understanding our consumers based on data. And ultimately, the question that we were trying to answer is, okay, so who exactly are our consumers here? We had the great case of understanding the Spanish beer consumers and what exactly are their interests, who are they, how can we address them in a relevant way with actually relevant communications, but what is the deal here in Russia? Who are our consumers, and how can we actually define our international premium beer consumers here in Russia versus mainstream beer consumers? And then, of course, use that in our communication. And as you do, the first step that we took was to look into traditional research. So the open source industry data that we have here. In our case, we use the M-index and try to dissect, okay, who are exactly our consumers and what are they interested in and what do they do? The problem with this, of course, is that open source industry data is still based on panels. It's relatively shallow, and the first results that we get is that, okay, there doesn't seem to be that many differences between premium beer consumers and mainstream beer consumers. So all our consumers exactly the same? What does it mean that both of them have the highest affinity for interest for watching TV and nobody seems to be going to the theater? What do we do with this information? So there was not all too much that that could help with, and even if we dissected this, all the consumers into different consumer groups or consumer audiences, here, for example, just as a snapshot, students or office workers, the insights that we can get into their behaviors and their interests are not that big. So again, here we see perhaps some interests might be reading books for office workers or gaming, or for students seem to be as well studying, which is fairly obvious, or reading books again. But what do they actually read about? What interests them in the studying, or what is their interest in these books? What topics do they read about? So that's why we decided to, together with Weborama, use one of their tools that's called Big Fish, which is basically a neural network for semantic analysis of huge amounts of big data that can be gathered online. And then match those insights that we can get from that tool with their DMP. To actually find those audiences, the actual real people who stand behind these interests that we can find. And these are the semantic maps that were created for this purpose. So analyzing different words throughout all digital inventory that are related to premium beer consumers and premium beer consumption, and try to understand the conversation that is happening around that. What the tool then does is, of course, very deep analytics into it. It tries to cluster all of these semantic maps into understandable groups of interests or topics. And then these can be automatically matched in the DMP to actual audiences, to the actual people who stand behind these interests. And this is just a little bit of a snapshot how the magic happens in this tool, how the clusterization of all of these data inputs and data points happen to then finally create these clusters that can be actually understood and that can be actionable for us in our communication. And basically, the end result of all of this exercise with Big Fish and with the DMP was that we were able to actually pinpoint some of the actually representative consumer groups that are out there consuming premium beer. The cool thing about this is that it actually does convey the message that some of the industry research we had seen before does hold. So we again see office people here as office heroes, or what we had before as students, we have as active youngsters. But these audiences are not just understanding of who are they, but these can be directly activated as well, which is exactly the added value from pinpointing the audiences in the DMP. And it doesn't stay there. Also, what can be done once we have this huge amount of big data is that we can drill down to understanding what exactly are those office heroes, who exactly are they, and what are they interested in. And if before we saw that they like things like gaming or books, now we actually can pinpoint that what they're reading about is things like IT, technology, startups. These types of topics seem to be the ones that interest them. And if before we saw that they're interested in gaming, now we actually can pinpoint that it's not the gaming itself, but the game consoles and the technology that is behind that that is being talked about and that the conversation revolves around.
Are you sponsoring an esport team already?
Not yet, but this research definitely leads towards the direction of that being a consideration for us.
It's very popular now.
Indeed, indeed. The thing is that here on the previous slide, we see that, okay, we thought that gaming is a big topic for beer. But what we're seeing here is actually that perhaps the conversation doesn't revolve that much around the games themselves, but actually the technology and the consoles that are attached to that. So it seems that for this specific consumer group, the technology link towards the gaming and towards what they read and the books is significant and is relevant to them. And the same happens with the active youngsters / students that we saw from the previous research. Here, before we saw, okay, students like studying. Okay, that was pretty obvious. But what we could tell from this data is that what they're actually interested in are fairly academic topics. So they're into humanities and history and philosophy, which would perhaps not have been so, well, obvious, at least to me. And this links directly also to one of the interests that could be pinpointed in worldwide travel or worldwide exploring, which in the M-index data seem to be one of the least affinitive interests, most probably because students don't have the money to actually travel, so it seems that they are not traveling. But the internet data shows that they actually are interested in it, despite them perhaps not having the possibilities to actually go to different countries, learn from different cultures, and so on. So traveling worldwide, different cultures, if we can talk about that, it will be relevant to them, even though they might not yet be there to travel. And basically, the whole point of this is that for us, for Heineken here in Russia, we clearly have proven the point of the value of using big data analytics and the insights that we can gather from there for really deepening the understanding of our consumers, not to stay on that shallow level of thinking, okay, basically all beer consumers are the same and they have some affinitive interests that are TV watching and theater is not interesting, but to actually pinpoint what is relevant to them so that we can then create our communication in a way that creates more and more relevancy and is hence not as disruptive as normally marketing in this high cluttered environment might be.
Cool. But before you sponsor an esports team, you should do a project with Domino's. Yes, that's
Yes,
right.
so
And next year you present it here together.
Together, indeed. It was a very great case also from you. So.
Because we have a Russian league.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And
thank you.